A primal energy known as the secret fire once pulsed at the heart of all creation. In the deep forges of the Valar Aulë, a young Maia named Anárion labored to master this fundamental force. It sang to his spirit, a melody of pure potential that he yearned to shape. His goal was to forge something of pure light, a bulwark against the growing whispers of a shadow in the world. But this task was not without peril, for to fail meant risking the very essence of his being. By the end of this story, you will understand the forgotten origins of a power that shaped the fate of Middle-earth long before Sauron ever rose. What ancient choice, made in a hall of fire and shadow, set the stage for all the conflicts to come? And where are you joining this tale from today? And what is the local time where you are? Can true light ever be created without first confronting the darkness? A flicker of light, pure and alive, pulsed within the crystal. It was no reflection, but a source, a tiny star born from Anárion's will and the song of the secret fire. The forge, once a cavern of shadow and heat, was now bathed in a gentle, unwavering warmth. For a moment, Anárion felt a surge of triumph, so potent it was dizzying. He had not merely shaped matter, he had kindled a spark of creation itself. This joy, however, was not private. From the archway of the great forge, another watched. Morinator, a Maia of keen ambition and sharper eyes, observed the glow. He felt no shared wonder, only a cold, covetous pull. Here was a power that could forge kingdoms, command respect, and perhaps even challenge the shadows he himself feared. The light in the crystal did not just illuminate the room, it illuminated the divide between two spirits, one of creation and one of possession. Anárion, his heart still full of that first success, turned with an open face, ready to share his discovery. But the guarded look in Morinator's eyes gave him pause. Should this fragile spark be offered freely, or was it now a secret that must be kept, a treasure to be defended? His trusting nature warred with a new, unfamiliar instinct for caution. This single choice, made in a heartbeat, would ripple far beyond the forge. For the act of kindling such a pure light sends vibrations through the foundations of the world, a signal felt by all who listen for power. And from the deep places, a faint and discordant echo answered, the sound of a different hammer falling on a different anvil, a rhythm that promised not creation, but dominion. That brief hesitation in Anárion's heart was all the answer Morinator needed. He stepped fully into the forge, his form seeming to drink the very light from the room. The gentle warmth from the crystal faltered for a moment, as if sensing a void. "You did it," Morinator stated, his voice devoid of the shared wonder Anárion had hoped for. It was a flat declaration of fact, not praise. "Now, show me how." The command hung in the air, sharp and uncompromising. This was no longer a conversation between fellow apprentices. The air itself grew heavy, thick with the unsaid truth that a line was being drawn between them. Anárion felt the weight of all his ancient law, the principle that knowledge should flow freely among the Maiar, a river to nourish all. To withhold was an act of distrust, a crack in the foundation of their order. But as he looked at the hungry intent in Morinator's eyes, he saw not a fellow creator, but a being who viewed the secret fire not as a song to be joined, but as a key to a lock. This pure light could become a weapon, a tool of coercion, something to be owned rather than shared. The debate that erupted was not loud, but but it was fierce, a clash of ideals that fractured their fellowship in that instant. Morinator spoke of progress, of strength, of using such power to impose order on a chaotic world. Anárion spoke of responsibility, of the inherent nature of the flame itself, which could not be forced into servitude without being corrupted. It was a choice between a law of community and a duty to the creation itself, and in that heated silence that followed, Anárion made his choice. He would not yield. "The secret is not mine to give," he said, his voice quiet but unshakable. "It is a trust." For the first time, he saw pure, unshielded anger in his colleague's face. Morinator's form seemed to grow darker, pulling the shadows of the forge around him like a cloak. "You make a powerful enemy for the sake of a flicker of light," he hissed. "Remember this day when that light is extinguished." With those words, he turned and strode from the hall. As the great doors swung shut, a cold, unnatural draft swept through the cavern, making the forges sputter and the newly born crystal dim. The warmth of creation had been challenged, and a storm was now inevitable. The chill left by Morinator's departure seemed to seep into the very stone of the forge. Anárion stood alone, the light of his crystal now feeling fragile, a small, defiant candle in a suddenly immense and hostile darkness. The conflict was no longer a simple disagreement between colleagues. It was something deeper, a poison he now recognized. He could not carry this burden alone. With the crystal cradled carefully in his hands, he sought the only being who could provide true understanding, his master, the great smith Aulë. He found the Valar not at the roaring heart of the forges, but in a quiet, subterranean gallery where the roots of the mountains gleamed with veins of raw ore. Aulë's immense form was still, his attention fixed on the deep, resonant song of the world's foundation. Without a word, Anárion placed the glowing crystal upon a smooth, dark stone between them. The light pulsed softly, its rhythm hesitant. Aulë's gaze fell upon it, and a profound sorrow filled his eyes, a grief as old as the world itself. "He has touched this," the Valar said, his voice a low rumble like tectonic plates shifting. "His shadow lingers on the edges of your light. You have felt the discord, the hunger to possess and twist. This is the work of Melkor." The name hung in the air, a vibration of pure malice. Anárion felt a cold dread settle in his spirit. This was no mere rival. This was the first and greatest of the Valar, who had turned from the design of creation to sow chaos and despair. His personal struggle with Morinator was merely a single, bitter leaf on a vast, poisoned tree. Aulë explained that Melkor's ultimate goal was to dominate the very themes of existence, to replace the symphony of creation with a single, crushing note of his own will. "Your success, child, has drawn his attention, Aulë," continued, his tone grave. "In kindling a light so pure, you have created something he cannot abide, for it is a truth that refutes his lies. You now stand directly in his path. The duty to create had instantly become a need to defend." Anárion looked from the wise, weary face of his master to the vulnerable spark he had brought into being. The choice was clear and terrible. He could retreat, hide his gift, and hope the shadow passed him by, or he could accept that his purpose was forever changed. He would not just be a maker, he would be a guardian, a profound resolve solidified within him, quiet and unyielding as diamond. "I will protect it," Anárion said, his voice steady. I will stand. Aulë nodded, a glimmer of fierce pride momentarily banishing the sorrow. Then you will need more than skill. You will need a shield for your spirit, and a vessel for your will. From the fabric of his own power, Aulë drew forth a sliver of metal that seemed to hold captured starlight. It was mithril, but unlike any ever mined, unbreakable and incorruptible. He placed the cool, radiant shard into Anárion's hand. This will serve as your focus and your anchor. Let it remind you that some things, when made with a pure heart, can withstand any darkness. The gift was not a weapon, but a promise of endurance, a tiny, unassailable fortress for the light he was sworn to keep. The mithril felt cool and impossibly light against his chest, a silent promise of endurance as Anárion left the forges behind. Aulë's command was clear, to seek the shadow at its source, a place the Valar named Udûn. With every step away from the ordered halls, the world changed. The vibrant songs of growing things faded, replaced by a hollow wind that carried the scent of ash and heated stone. He walked for what felt like an age across plains of cracked earth, where the very soil was scorched black and lifeless. Jagged mountains clawed at a perpetually gray sky, and in the distance, a dull red glow pulsed on the horizon like an infected wound. This was not the wild, untamed beauty of nature. This was a land that had been broken, its spirit twisted into a mockery of its original form. It was the physical truth of Melkor's corruption, and it chilled Anárion more deeply than any winter. Strange, skittering things moved at the edges of his vision, creatures of scale and shadow that recoiled with a hiss when the light from his crystal fell upon them. They did not attack, they simply fled, as if the purity of his creation was a pain they could not bear. This presented his first real test. He could dim the light, using it only as a subtle shield to cloak his passage and move unseen through this blighted realm. Or he could let it shine forth, a bold beacon that would reveal the full horror of this place, ensuring he missed no hidden danger. To hide was the safer path, the prudent choice. But as he looked upon the tortured land, he understood that prudence was a form of surrender. His mission was not merely to observe, but to witness. He chose to be a beacon. The crystal at his chest flared, its gentle glow intensifying into a brilliant, unwavering radiance that pushed back the clinging shadows. It was an act of defiance, a declaration that he would not skulk in the presence of this evil. The twisted creatures shrieked and burrowed into the ash, but worse than their cries was the new silence that followed. The land itself seemed to be holding its breath, aware of an alien presence, a light that did not belong. The ground beneath his feet began to tremble, a low, grinding vibration that grew with every passing moment. He was getting closer. A great fissure yawned ahead, venting plumes of black, acrid smoke that stung his eyes and choked the air. This was the antechamber of Udûn, and the mountain itself was groaning at his approach. The mountain's groan was a living thing, a deep-throated roar of protest, as Anárion descended into the fissure. The air grew thick and heavy, tasting of sulfur and something fouler, a spiritual decay that clung to the back of his throat. He followed a treacherous, natural staircase down into a vast cavern, its ceiling lost in a haze of smoke and shadow. But it was not empty. Figures moved in the gloom, forms that should have been light and song, but were now bent and distorted. They were Maiar, like him, but their essence was frayed, their melodies broken into jarring, discordant notes. They were the echoes, spirits who had listened too long to Melkor's lies and had their own songs twisted into a chorus of despair. The sight struck Anárion with a physical pain, a profound grief for these lost kin. Their fall was the true cost of this war, a corruption not of flesh, but of spirit. One of them drifted closer, its form a shifting smear of shadow. "You should not have come, maker of trinkets," it whispered, its voice a dry rustle that seemed to sap the warmth from the air. "Your little light is a lie. It will flicker and die, just as all things do. We have seen the truth. The void is all that awaits." The words were not just sounds, they were weapons. Anárion felt a cold dread seep into his mind, his own fears amplified 1,000-fold. What if he failed? What if his pure creation was ultimately meaningless against such vast and patient malice? The light at his chest dimmed perceptibly as doubt clawed at his heart. He looked at the tormented spirit before him, and instead of anger, he felt an overwhelming pity. These were not monsters, they were prisoners. To strike them with force would be to accept Melkor's terms, to believe that conflict could only be answered with destruction. A different memory surfaced, the first clear note of the secret fire as it ignited within the crystal, a sound of pure, unbounded possibility. He closed his eyes, shutting out the taunts and the oppressive gloom. He reached deep within himself, past the fear and the doubt, to the core of his being where his own song of creation still resonated, and he began to sing. It was not a complex melody of power, but a single, pure note, clear and unwavering. It held no command, no attack, only the simple, undeniable truth of existence, of light, and of hope. The effect was immediate and violent. The corrupted Maiar recoiled as if scalded. Their whispers turned to shrieks of agony, not from pain, but from a terrible, forgotten recognition. The pure note was a mirror, and in it they saw the horrifying distortion of their own souls. One of them, a being whose form was little more than a tattered wisp of hatred, could not bear the reflection. It screamed, a sound that tore the fabric of the cavern itself. "He sees us. He reveals us," it wailed, its voice fracturing. "The Master must know. The light seeks to undo us." With that, it turned and fled, a streak of blackness plunging deeper into the abyss, its warning echoing off the stone. Anárion held his note, his heart aching with a tragic victory. He had proven the secret fire could heal, but the act of healing had become a declaration of war, and the war had just been brought to its general's door. That single, pure note of creation had become a battle cry. The echoes of his song had not yet faded before the cavern began to seethe with movement. From crevices in the rock and from the choking smoke itself, they came, a host of twisted forms. They were the corrupted Maiar, no longer whispering doubts, but now shrieking with a unified, singular hatred, and at their head stood Morinator. His form was no longer that of a fellow apprentice, but a thing of solidified shadow and simmering rage, a dark mirror to Anárion's light. "You brought your little spark into the heart of the furnace," he snarled, his voice a chorus of grinding stone. "Now watch it be consumed." The horde surged forward. Anárion's mind raced. He was a maker, a guardian, not a warrior. The secret fire was a force for building, for kindling life. To turn it to harm felt like a violation of its very nature. But as the first of the shadowy forms lunged, claws extended to tear the light from his chest. Instinct overthrew philosophy. He had no weapon but the flame itself. He raised his hands, not in a gesture of creation, but of defense. He did not sing, he roared. The secret fire answered not as a melody, but as a shockwave. A torrent of pure, white energy erupted from him, a silent, blinding storm that was the absolute opposite of the surrounding gloom. It was not heat that burned, but truth that unmade. Where it touched the corrupted spirits, their forms did not burn, they simply unraveled. Their twisted songs were severed, their shadows dissolved into nothingness with piercing shrieks of negation. It was a dazzling, terrifying display of raw power, a light so intense it scorched the very air and left after images dancing in the sudden, ringing silence. The attack broke, the remaining echoes scattered like ash on the wind, their will to fight shattered. Morinator alone remained, his dark form flickering, wounded but not defeated. He fixed Anárion with a look of pure, venomous loathing before retreating into the deeper shadows, a promise of future vengeance in his wake. And then it was over. The brilliant energy vanished, and with it went Anárion's strength. He collapsed to one knee, his spirit feeling hollowed out, scraped raw. The light in his crystal was dim, its pulse weak and faltering. A profound sickness washed over him, a moral revulsion so deep it was physical. He had used the song of life as a cudgel. He had turned a gift of creation into an instrument of utter destruction. The victory felt like a desecration. As he knelt there, gasping in the sulphurous air, a choice presented itself. He could feel Morinator's fading presence, a trail of hatred leading deeper into Udûn. The strategic part of him screamed to pursue, to end this threat now, to use the last dregs of his power to extinguish that hateful spark before it could grow. It was the choice of wrath, the desire for a clean, final end. But the wiser part of him, the part that still remembered all his lessons, knew the truth. He was wounded, drained not just in power, but in spirit. To chase a foe into the heart of darkness, while so vulnerable, was not courage, it was folly. It was a trap he would be walking into. With a groan of effort that came from the core of his being, Anárion made his choice. He would not give Melkor the satisfaction of a reckless, prideful charge. He would retreat, recover, and learn from this terrible lesson. He would live to guard the light another day. It was a choice of wisdom over wrath, a decision that left a vengeful enemy alive, but preserved the one thing that truly mattered, the hope he carried. As he slowly gathered the tattered remains of his will, preparing for the long, arduous journey back to the light, he felt it. A new presence, vast and ancient and utterly cold, turned its attention upon him. It was not the scattered malice of the echoes, nor the focused hatred of Morinator. This was a consciousness as deep as the abyss itself, a gaze from the absolute heart of Udûn that weighed his soul and found it interesting. The shadow had not just seen him, it had taken notice. The journey back to Valinor was a slow pilgrimage through a world now stained by the memory of shadow. Anárion carried not just the dimmed crystal at his chest, but the heavy knowledge of what he had seen, and worse, what he had done. The forges of Aulë, once a place of pure creation, felt strangely silent and small upon his return. He did not go to his old anvil. He went directly to the mansion of Manwë, high upon the mountain of Tanaquetil, where the air was clear and the winds carried all voices. Before the assembled Valar, the powers of the world, he laid bare his entire experience. He spoke of the blighted lands of Udûn, the tragic corruption of the echoes, the bitter confrontation with Morinator, and the terrible, unraveling power he had been forced to wield. He did not hide his own revulsion, his feeling that he had betrayed the very nature of the secret fire by turning it into a weapon. This honesty, this raw accounting of his failure as much as his success, changed everything. His personal quest was over. The conflict was now theirs. A great debate erupted within the circle of destiny. The council was fractured, a rift opening between two fundamental responses to the shadow. Orome, the great hunter, roared for immediate and total war. Let us ride forth now and scour the pits of Udûn clean with wind and wrath, he declared, his voice like a thunderclap. He saw Melkor's gathering strength as a cancer that must be cut out before it could spread further. But others, like Nienna, the Lady of Mercy and Grief, wept at the prospect. Her tears were not of weakness, but of foresight. To march to war now is to trample the world we mean to save, she counseled, her voice a soft counterpoint to the storm. What of the spirits still caught in his web, the lands that would be shattered in the struggle? Is there no hope for redemption, only the finality of the sword? The political tension was palpable, a struggle between righteous fury and compassionate patience, and Anárion, a mere Maia, stood silently at its center. All eyes eventually turned to him, the only one among them who had stood in that darkness and returned. The question was not spoken aloud, but it hung in the air, demanding an answer. What is your counsel, child of Aulë? What is the nature of the power you carry? Anárion looked from the fierce face of Orome to the sorrowful one of Nienna, and he understood that both were right and both were wrong. He thought of the corrupted Maiar, how they had recoiled not from force, but from the pure, unadulterated truth of his song. He remembered the mithril against his chest, a shield, not a blade. He made his choice. He would speak a dangerous, hopeful truth. The secret fire is not merely a weapon for our hands, he said, his voice gaining strength with each word. It is a light for the eyes of those trapped in shadow. It can be a shield for the whole of Middle-earth, a bulwark not of armies, but of spirit. We do not need to conquer the land to save it. We need to make the darkness remember the dawn. His words fell into a profound silence. He had not chosen a side in the debate. He had defined a new path entirely. He was no longer just a messenger or a victim. He had declared himself a champion of this idea, committing the very forces of light to a philosophy of vigilant, active defense. The stakes were now immeasurably higher. The fate of Middle-earth would not be decided by one great battle, but by the endurance of this light in the face of an endless night. Finally, Manwë, the king of the Valar, spoke. His voice was the sound of the sky itself, vast and calm. The words of Anárion carry the wisdom of both the forge and the heart, he decreed. We will not march to war, not yet. Our first weapon will be watchfulness. Our first army will be those who, like him, are willing to stand as sentinels. Let the shadow know it is observed. Let it feel the weight of a light that will not be extinguished. The time for the great confrontation was delayed, but the lines of the enduring conflict had now been drawn for all ages to come. Back in the quiet of Aulë's forges, The memory of that vast, cold gaze from the heart of Udûn never left him. Anárion understood now that watchfulness alone was not enough. The light needed a home, a permanent anchor in the world that could not be so easily dimmed or unraveled. It needed to become more than a flicker in his hand. It needed to become a star. This resolve solidified into a singular, all-consuming purpose: to forge the first true vessel for the secret fire. He began with the sliver of Mithril Aulë had given him, the unbreakable anchor for his own spirit. He did not melt it in the common fires, but bathed it in the light of his own crystal, letting the two essences slowly intertwine over days and nights, until the metal itself seemed to be woven from solidified moonlight. Into this radiant lattice, he began the delicate, dangerous work of weaving a fragment of the pure flame. It was not an act of hammering, but of guided surrender, a process that demanded every ounce of his skill and focus. As the gem took shape, the world outside the forge began to react. Ominous dark clouds, not of natural weather, gathered over the mountains of Valinor. The ground trembled with a deep, resentful rhythm, as if the very act of creating something so incorruptible was a personal insult to the shadow. This was not mere coincidence. It was a spiritual law in action, the darkness recoiling at the birth of a light it could not touch. The greatest challenge, however, was not external. To bind the flame permanently, he had to give it a piece of his own song, a fragment of his immortal essence. He felt the connection forming, a brilliant, painful thread linking his spirit to the growing star. A terrible choice presented itself. He could sever the thread now, creating a beautiful but inert jewel. Or he could pour more of himself into it, ensuring its eternal radiance, but risking his own fading, becoming a diminished echo of who he was. He thought of the corrupted Maiar, their songs broken and lost to the void. He thought of the long ages ahead and the enduring hope this star could represent. There was no hesitation. He opened his spirit completely, letting his own light flow into the gem in a final, selfless act of creation. The moment his essence fused with the flame, the transformation was complete. The star of Eärendil blazed into existence, its light a silent, piercing song that flooded the forge and shot through the gathering gloom outside. It was no longer just a vessel. It was a beacon, a tiny piece of creation's original song, made permanent and tangible. That sudden, brilliant signal flashed across the world, a flare of pure hope, seen by every elf in Tirion, and felt as a searing pain in the deep pits of Angband. Anárion, now paler and less substantial, looked upon his work with a profound, weary love. He had succeeded in creating a shield for all of Middle-earth, but in doing so, he had forged the one object the shadow would forever seek to destroy. Peace, as it turned out, was an illusion as fragile as glass. The star of Eärendil had barely begun its eternal vigil when the shadow struck back, not with an army, but with a surgical, venomous theft. Morinator, now swollen with a fraction of Melkor's own dreadful power, moved like a shard of pure night through the defenses of Valinor. He did not come to conquer the land, only to claim its heart. In a silent, brutal raid, he shattered the sanctum where the star was kept and stole the light away. The crime was discovered at dawn, not by a sound, but by a profound silence, a hollow ache where the star's comforting song had once resonated. For Anárion, the theft was not just a loss, it was a profound, personal violation. He felt it as a physical tear in his own spirit, the severing of that brilliant thread he had woven with his own essence. A wave of despair and guilt crashed over him so completely it stole his breath. He had been so focused on creating the perfect vessel, he had failed to protect it. His greatest work, the shield for all of Middle-earth, was now a prize in the hand of his bitterest enemy. The Shadow's reach was longer, and its cunning far deeper than anyone had feared. The Valar were thrown into turmoil, their watchfulness proven a flawed strategy in the face of such brazen aggression. In the echoing silence of his failure, a choice crystallized. He could surrender to the grief, to the overwhelming weight of his mistake, and let the Valar mount their slow, deliberate response, or he could act. He could chase the thief into the very jaws of the abyss. This was no longer a philosophical mission of witness. It was a personal vendetta, a desperate need to reclaim the part of his own soul that had been stolen. The path of grief was a quiet tomb. The path of pursuit was a plunge into certain peril. Anárion's hands, which had once trembled with the aftermath of using the flame as a weapon, now clenched with a new, cold resolve. He would not wait for councils and debates. He would go alone, gathering the few tools he had left, a simple traveler's pack, and the now dull mithril focus on his chest. He turned his back on the undimmed light of Valinor. He was a solitary figure, diminished but unbroken, stepping once more into the gathering night, driven by a love for what was lost and a fury that finally matched the darkness he pursued. The scent of ash and cold iron was a trail he could taste on the wind, a foul miasma that grew thicker with every northward step. Anárion tracked the fading echo of his own stolen light, a phantom pain in his spirit that pulled him toward the jagged peaks, where the sky itself seemed bruised and broken. This was Utumno, the first and greatest fortress of Melkor, a mountain range not raised by nature, but clawed from the earth by hatred. Its gates were vast chasms that breathed out a wind that sapped warmth and hope. To enter was to walk into the belly of the beast. He stood at the threshold, the memory of his last, violent use of the secret fire, a cold stone in his heart. A brilliant, defiant light had served as a beacon then, but here it would be a target. He made a choice born of grim necessity, not of fear. He drew his power inward, pulling the comforting warmth of the flame deep into the core of his being, until it was nothing but a faint, hidden ember. The world around him plunged into a deeper, more profound darkness, a gloom so absolute it felt like a physical weight. He was now a shadow among shadows, a hunter moving with a silence that felt like a betrayal of his own nature. This was his first true act as a warrior, to embrace the stealth of the enemy in order to defeat him. The tunnels of Utumno were not simple stone passages. They were living nightmares, veins of despair that pulsed with a rhythm of torment. The walls themselves seemed to watch him, their surfaces shifting with half-seen faces that whispered of forgotten joys and inevitable ends. He moved through caverns where the very air was thick with a psychic residue of anguish, each breath a struggle against a despair that begged him to simply lie down and let the darkness take him. His only comfort was the hidden spark within, a tiny, defiant pulse that whispered, "I am still here." He pressed on, his senses strained to their limits. The distant, rhythmic clang of immense hammers was a constant, jarring percussion that vibrated through the rock beneath his feet. It was not the creative music of Aulë's forges, but a brutal, monotonous beat, the sound of industry bent solely toward domination and pain. This was the great work of the enemy, the forging of armies and instruments of torture, a perversion of the very concept of making. Each step deeper was a confrontation with a different fear. The fear of being discovered, torn apart by the monstrous things that slithered in the adjacent tunnels. The fear of failure, of his stolen light being used to scourge the world. But the deepest fear was the one that gnawed at his resolve, the terrifying thought that this crushing, endless night was the true nature of reality, and the light he cherished was only a fleeting, foolish dream. He clung to the memory of the star's first pure song, using it as a shield against the whispering walls. He was no longer just a creator, reclaiming his work. He was a spark in the absolute darkness, and the fate of that spark now depended entirely on his patience, his silence, and his will to endure what no being of light was ever meant to witness. The tunnel opened onto a gallery overlooking a chasm of fire and industry, so vast its far wall was lost in a haze of smoke. This was the Foundry of Lies. Below, legions of twisted beings labored at forges that glowed with a sickly orange light, their hammers falling in a discordant rhythm that was a mockery of Aulë's sacred craft. They were not shaping metal into tools or art, but into weapons of pure shadow, blades that seemed to drink the light from the very air. Anárion's spirit recoiled at the perversion. This was not just an army being built. It was the act of creation itself being systematically poisoned, the song of making twisted into a scream, a white-hot fury, purer and more dangerous than any he had felt before, surged through him. It was a rage born of love for what was being defiled, a primal need to leap down and shatter it all, to cleanse this blasphemy with the very flame they sought to extinguish. His hands trembled with the impulse to unleash the secret fire and burn this cavern to its foundations. But then he felt it, a faint, desperate pull from high above the chaos. His eyes lifted to a central spire of jagged rock that speared the cavern's ceiling. There, encased in a cage of black iron, a familiar light flickered weakly. The star of Eärendil, his stolen soul. The sight was an anchor in the storm of his anger. To attack the forge would be a glorious, righteous suicide. It would satisfy his rage for a moment, but it would doom his true mission. The star would be lost forever, and Melkor's victory would be complete. He had to master his wrath, to let this great evil continue its work unchallenged, all for the chance to reclaim a single, greater good. It was the most difficult discipline of his life, a choice that felt like a betrayal of everything he was. With a shuddering breath, he pulled the heat of his anger back inside, cooling it into a core of cold, focused resolve. He was not here to start a war. He was here to win one. Turning his back on the infernal spectacle, he became a wisp of shadow once more, slipping along the high gallery, his gaze locked on the distant spire. He moved past monstrous smiths who chanted in a guttural tongue, their forms illuminated by the hellish glow. Each step away from the fight felt wrong, a burden on his spirit, but each step also brought him closer to the faint, beckoning pulse of the light he had come to reclaim. The air in the spire was unnaturally still, a silent bubble above the cacophony of the forges below. Anárion stepped into the chamber, and there he was. Morinator stood with his back to the entrance, his form a vortex of shadow before a dark altar. Upon it, the star of Eärendil lay trapped, its light pulsing in a slow, pained rhythm like a captured heartbeat. Morinator did not turn. I felt you the moment you chose to hide your light, he said, his voice dripping with cold amusement. You move like a thief in your own house. It is a fitting end, is it not? The creator, diminished, skulking in the dark to beg for his own soul back. Anárion felt the pull of the star, a desperate, silent cry that resonated with the frayed thread of his own spirit. This was not a place for the brute force he had unleashed in the caverns. This was a different kind of battlefield, one of spirit and memory. Morinator finally turned, and his eyes held no trace of the ambitious Maia he had once been. They were pits of calculated malice. You think this is about possession, he hissed, gesturing to the star. This is about truth. Look, he did not raise a weapon. He raised a hand, and the air between them shimmered. Visions flooded Anárion's mind, not as illusions, but as psychic assaults. He saw a Middle-earth remade by Melkor's design, a world of perfect, terrible order. Mountains were carved into brutal spires, forests were replaced with regimented fields of black iron, and free peoples moved in lockstep, their wills extinguished, their songs silent. There was no strife, no chaos, only the crushing, eternal peace of the grave. See the glory of it, Morinator's voice whispered inside his skull. No more struggle. No more failed creations, only one will, one purpose. Your little light is a flaw in this perfect design, a spark of chaos that must be smothered. Anárion staggered under the weight of the vision. It was a logical endpoint, a seductive lie that promised an end to all pain by erasing everything that made life precious. The despair was a physical weight, urging him to kneel, to accept the inevitable. But as he looked at Morinator, he did not see a conqueror. He saw a prisoner, a spirit who had once stood beside him in all his forges, his own hands shaping wonders from the song of the world. The choice was clear. He could fight fire with fire, assaulting Morinator's mind with his own power in a battle that would likely shatter them both. Or he could do the one thing the shadow could not anticipate. He could offer redemption. Anárion lowered his hands, a gesture of surrender that was, in truth, his greatest act of defiance. He closed his eyes, shutting out the horrific vision, and reached for a different memory. He did not sing a note of power. He hummed the first, simple melody they had ever woven together in the forges, a tune of pure, untainted joy in the act of making. Remember the first crystal we shaped, Morinator, he asked, his voice soft but clear, cutting through the psychic noise. It was flawed. It held a crack. But we did not break it. We learned from it. The light is not a flaw to be corrected. It is the source of all learning, all growth. You were not made for this empty dominion. You were made for the song. For a single, breathtaking moment, the assault ceased. The visions of the iron world flickered and faded. Morinator stood frozen, his outstretched hand trembling. The cold certainty in his eyes fractured, replaced by a flicker of profound, agonizing confusion. It was the ghost of the Maia he had been, a spirit that remembered the warmth of the forge and the companionship of a shared purpose. His gaze dropped from Anárion's face to the star on the altar. His hand, which had been poised to crush the light in its cage, instead hovered over it, fingers uncurling in a gesture that was no longer a threat, but a question. That flicker of doubt in Morinator's eyes lasted only a heartbeat. Anárion's offer of redemption was a key, but the lock had rusted shut over ages of hatred. The memory of the forge, the shared song, It was a ghost that could not compete with the solid, intoxicating reality of the power he now wielded. The confusion on his face twisted, hardening into a mask of pure, defensive rage. "You offer me dust," he spat, his voice cracking with a venom that shattered the fragile peace of the chamber. "While he offers me a crown, he would not be reminded of what he was. He would only embrace what he had become." In a single, violent motion, his hovering hand clenched into a fist. He turned from Anárion, his entire focus on the trapped star. He would not just keep it, he would unmake it, proving once and for all that no light could endure the totality of his will. He drove his will against the cage, not to open it, but to crush the light within. A sound like shattering crystal, but on a spiritual plane, screamed through the room. The star flared in agony, its rhythmic pulse stuttering toward silence. That was the final betrayal. The last, thin thread of their shared past was severed, not by time or distance, but by this deliberate act of annihilation. Anárion did not think. He moved. There were no more words, no more melodies. This was a raw, desperate scramble of bodies and purpose. He threw himself at the altar, his own body becoming a shield between Morinator's fury and the fading star. Shadows, solid as iron, lashed out, but he did not raise a counterattack. He wrapped himself around the iron cage, his back taking the brutal impact, meant for the light within. He felt a searing cold tear through his being, a wound that did not bleed but siphoned the very warmth from his spirit. The inner fire that had always been his constant companion, the ember he had protected so carefully, guttered and dim. He was failing. He could feel his own essence unraveling, the strength to hold on seeping away into the oppressive dark. To die here, merely as a shield, was not enough. The star would still be trapped, vulnerable the moment his grip failed. A final, absolute choice presented itself. He could not save the star by carrying it. He could only save it by becoming it. With the last dregs of his will, Anárion did not try to pry the cage open. Instead, he poured what remained of his own fading light directly into the gem, a final, selfless transfusion. He was not forcing his power upon it. He was asking it to accept the last fragment of his song, to let his spirit merge with its own, to make it whole again. It was the ultimate act of trust, a complete surrender to the very principle of creation he had always served. The consequence was instantaneous and cataclysmic. The star, moments from being extinguished, drank in his sacrifice. It did not just rekindle, it erupted. A silent, blinding wave of pure white light exploded from the altar, a dawn born in the heart of midnight. It held no violence, only an absolute, undeniable truth that could not be contained. The force of it hurled Morinator back, his form scattering like smoke against the chamber walls, his scream of rage lost in the overwhelming radiance. For a moment, there was no Utumno, no shadow, no struggle. There was only light, and at its center, Anárion was gone, his essence now an inseparable part of the beacon he had died to save. Unity was a silent, all-consuming ocean. Anárion was no longer a being looking at a star. He was the star. His consciousness expanded, dissolving into the infinite, humming tapestry of the secret fire itself. He felt every vibration of creation, from the slow, patient growth of a mountain root to the frantic dance of a newborn star. The loneliness of his journey, the fear, the pain of his wounds, all of it was washed away in this transcendent communion. He was not just a user of the flame anymore. He had become a living part of its eternal song. The transformation was absolute. The form of the Maia was burned away, replaced by a being of pure, conscious radiance. And that radiance had to go somewhere. The light did not simply flash, it detonated. A wave of silent, purifying force erupted from the spire, scouring the chamber of every last stain of shadow. The black iron of the cage vaporized. The whispering echoes etched into the walls were silenced forever. The light poured out through windows and cracks, flooding the caverns below with the undeniable truth of dawn. It was the first sunrise in the heart of eternal night, a direct and undeniable challenge to the very concept of Melkor's dominion. In that glorious, terrifying moment of absolute power, a choice crystallized within the core of the new being he had become. He could gather this immense energy and flee, carrying his reclaimed light back to the safety of Valinor, a triumphant symbol of hope that had defied the dark. Or he could turn this light inward, into the deepest foundations of Utumno itself. He could become not just a beacon, but a bomb. The stakes were no longer about one stolen star or a personal vendetta. This was a cosmic decision. To strike now would be to gamble the fate of his very essence against the chance to wound the enemy in his deepest stronghold. It was the choice between being a symbol for others to follow or being the weapon that carved the path. His legacy would be defined in this single, searing instant. And from the absolute depths below, a roar of pure, world-shaking fury answered the light. The mountain groaned not in protest, but in rage. The foundations of the earth trembled as the shadow, personally and utterly offended, began to rise. The mountain's roar was not a sound, but a shattering of reality itself. Melkor's wrath, focused and absolute, surged upward from the deep places, a tidal wave of pure malice that made the very stone of Utumno scream. Anárian's transcendent moment of unity was over. The war had found him. He was no longer just a spirit of light. He was a signal flare in the enemy's central fortress, and every horror that lurked in those tunnels now turned its attention to extinguishing him. What began as a personal quest to reclaim a stolen soul had just become the spark for open, cataclysmic conflict. The corridors, once navigated in stealth, now teemed with movement. Bestial forms, nightmares given flesh and scale, poured from side passages, their claws scraping against stone, their guttural roars echoing the fury of their master. They were not merely beasts, they were instruments of a single, hateful will. Anárion did not run. He walked, a shining figure in the oppressive gloom, and the light that was his very being became his only weapon. He did not attack. He simply existed, and his radiance was a shield. The creatures lunged, only to recoil, shrieking as the pure light seared their shadow-soaked essence. They could not touch him, but their sheer numbers began to form a living, thralling wall of hatred, slowly pressing him back. He realized then that a direct, brute force escape was impossible. He was one being against an entire, awakened hell, but he was not the only light that had been stolen and trapped in this place. Faint, distant echoes of other captive energies, other sparks of creation, brushed against his awareness from deeper prisons. A new strategy, born of sacrifice, formed in his mind. He could not save them by fighting his way to them. He had to draw all the enemy's fury to himself. He made a choice that would define the rest of his existence. Instead of fleeing toward the surface, he turned and plunged sideways, driving deeper into a major thoroughfare of the fortress. He let his light blaze brighter, a defiant star moving against the tide of darkness, a beacon so insulting that every soldier and monster in Utumno would be compelled to chase it. He became the diversion. The gamble worked. The legions shifted, converging on his brilliant, moving target. The pressure on those distant, captive lights would lessen, giving them a fleeting chance to find their own way out. But the cost was immediate and terrifying. By making himself the primary focus of Melkor's rage, he had painted a target on his back that glowed across all the spiritual planes. The shadows themselves seemed to congeal, striking at him with a cold that sought to freeze his very soul. He was a lighthouse in a hurricane, and the storm was now entirely his to endure. The path to freedom was a running battle through halls of shifting terror. He moved through chambers where the air itself was poison, across bridges that spanned bottomless pits of echoing despair. His light was a constant, unwavering shield, but he could feel it eroding under the relentless, crushing pressure of the surrounding hate. He was burning his own essence as fuel for this escape. Yet, through the chaos and the overwhelming darkness, a single, consistent glimmer appeared ahead. It was a shard of genuine starlight, a tiny, piercing point of white that danced just at the edge of his vision, always moving upward. It was not his own light, but something else, a guide. Whether it was a forgotten echo of the stars themselves, or a deliberate signal from some unknown ally, he did not know. He only knew that he had to follow it, trusting this slender thread of hope through the absolute madness of the world's first open war. The shard of starlight led him through a final, choking corridor of smoke and shadow, and then, with a sudden, violent heave, the mountain spat him out. He burst from the gates of Utumno and into the open air, a blazing comet of raw spirit expelled from the belly of the beast. The victory was not one of conquest, but of escape, a profound testament that even the deepest darkness could not hold a light that refused to be extinguished. But the cost of that defiance was absolute. He felt his form unraveling, the last tattered remnants of his Maia body dissolving into the brilliant energy he had become. He was no longer Anárion, the smith of Aulë. He was a storm of pure, conscious light with nowhere to go. The choice was immediate and final. He could let his essence scatter on the winds, a glorious but fleeting sacrifice. Or he could complete the union he had begun in the spire, surrendering his identity entirely to the vessel he had died to save. He looked not at the hell he had left behind, but upward, toward the vast, star-dusted canvas of the night sky. He thought of the world below, still young and vulnerable, and of the children who would one day walk its shores, needing a sign that the night was not eternal. His purpose, which had begun with a single crystal in a forge, now demanded a cosmic scale. He made his decision. With a final, willing release, he poured the totality of his being into the star of Eärendil, binding his spirit to it for all time. The transformation sealed his fate. He ascended, not to the undying lands, but to the firmament, becoming a fixed and eternal star. His triumph was bittersweet, a salvation that was also a separation. He was now a guide, but could never walk the lands he guarded, a hope that shone from an unreachable distance. His first act in this new existence was to turn his gaze eastward, across the great sea. There, on the far shores of a continent, Still wrapped in the sleep of creation, he cast a single, focused beam of his light. It was a promise, a silent greeting to the world he was sworn to protect, a pinpoint of certainty in the primordial dark. The craftsman was gone, the guardian was eternal. The new star blazed over the shores of Valinor, a silent, piercing truth in the night sky. The Valar gathered, their immense forms stilled by the sight. They did not need to be told its origin, for the song woven into its light was one they all knew, a melody now permanently anchored to the heavens. It was Anárion's final signature, a testament written in pure energy. His sacrifice was not a defeat, but a profound confirmation, a living proof that the secret fire could endure even the absolute heart of darkness and emerge not just intact, but transcendent. This was no longer a theory debated in the mansion of Manwë. It was a fact etched into the firmament. The star's unwavering light washed away the last vestiges of hesitation. The age of watchfulness was over. A new and terrible resolve solidified among the powers, a collective understanding that Melkor's corruption could not be contained, only confronted. The first plans for a war to shake the very foundations of the world began to take shape in that moment, strategies of immense power and unimaginable consequence. Yet, this resolve was tempered by a deep and abiding sorrow. The light in the sky was also a grave marker. They had gained an eternal beacon, but they had lost one of their own, a vibrant spirit of creation, extinguished in its prime. Aulë, the great smith, stood longest in silence, his gaze fixed upon the star. He felt the absence in his forges, the silent anvil where a brilliant student had once labored. His pride in Anárion's courage was a cold comfort against the weight of the loss. And then, his thoughts, heavy with memory, turned to the others. He looked upon the Maiar, who still studied under him, their faces illuminated by the celestial light of their lost brother. His silent question hung in the air, a challenge and a burden for the ages to come. Who among you will be next to take up the hammer? Who will carry this new, heavier responsibility for a world now poised on the brink of open war? That new star in the heavens did not just illuminate the night, it ignited a fire in the hearts of the Maiar who remained. One by one, they stepped forward, their spirits kindled by Anárion's ultimate sacrifice. They looked upon the distant, sleeping continent of Middle-earth and understood that their role was no longer to remain in the bliss of Valinor, but to walk the mortal lands as its hidden guardians. This was not a duty of conquest, but of stewardship, a quiet war fought in the shadows to preserve the fragile beauty of a world not yet fully awake. These first, self-appointed sentinels were the blueprint, the spiritual ancestors of the order that would one day send the 5 wizards, the Astari, on their own fateful missions in the Third Age. The age of the emissary had begun. An era of profound vigilance settled over the world, a watchful peace that everyone knew was temporary. The Valar had won a great victory, yet they understood the grim reality. Melkor's shadow had been checked, his fortress broken, but his essence was a poison that had seeped into the very soil of the earth. He was not destroyed, only dispersed, his malice waiting to coalesce in new forms, under new names. This created an enduring tension, a cold war that would last for millennia. The light had proven it could survive the deepest dark, but the dark had proven it would always return. In response to this enduring threat, the great smiths and lore masters of the Valar made a fateful choice. They would forge new artifacts of power, not as weapons of war, but as vessels for light and preservation. The concept of the Rings of Power was born in this era, born from a desperate hope to create pockets of untarnished beauty and order, realms where the shadow could not take root. Yet this very act of creation carried a terrible peril. To imbue an object with such power is to make it a target, a prize that could be twisted if it ever fell into the wrong hands. The same light meant to protect a forest glade or a river valley could, in the grasp of a tyrant, become a chain to bind it. The stakes for the entire world were raised immeasurably, for now the fate of nations could one day hinge on the fate of a single, beautiful, and dangerously powerful object. And what of the secret fire, that primal force Anárion had mastered and ultimately become? In the ages that followed, its true nature faded from common knowledge. It became a legend, a whispered truth spoken of in the oldest elven lays and the most hidden dwarven chronicles. It was the myth of a light that could not be corrupted, a song that could heal the broken world. But legends are not lies. They are truths waiting for the right moment to be rediscovered. They are seeds planted in the soil of time, waiting for a future age when the darkness grows thick once more, and a new generation must learn that the most powerful forces are not those that break things, but those that make them whole. The memory of the flame became a quiet promise, a hidden thread of hope woven into the very fabric of history, waiting for the day it would be needed again. The first songs were whispers in the twilight, hummed by the Vanyar elves who had witnessed the star's sudden birth. In the tranquil libraries of Tirion, lore masters with ink-stained fingers began the solemn work of transcribing these whispers into history. They recorded the name of Anárion, his sacrifice, and the nature of the secret fire he had mastered. This was not mere record-keeping. It was an act of profound responsibility. They understood that a truth unrecorded is a truth lost, and the world would need this memory in the struggles to come. With every elegant glyph etched onto parchment, they were forging a weapon against forgetting, a shield for the spirit of all free peoples. These early chronicles became the seeds of epic poems and haunting melodies, stories told under the starlight to inspire courage in young warriors and hope in weary hearts. The Lay of the Last Star Shaper, as it came to be known, was a beacon in its own right, a cultural inheritance that reminded all who heard it that light could be born from the deepest sacrifice. Yet, as the legend was passed down through generations, a subtle transformation occurred. The intricate, dangerous process of wielding the secret fire, the precise spiritual laws that governed it, these complex truths slowly faded. The how was lost, leaving only the powerful, simplified what. Anárion the complex craftsman became Anárion the mythic martyr, and the flame itself shifted from a tangible force one could learn to a distant, almost divine mystery. The full, potent truth was obscured by the very beauty of the tales created to preserve it. This necessary blurring of fact into myth created a deep and troubling conflict for the wisest of the lore masters. They alone guarded the unvarnished scrolls that detailed the flame's true potential, and with that knowledge came a terrible burden. To share the complete truth could be catastrophic. What if a seeker, driven by noble intentions but lacking the spiritual purity of Anárion, attempted to wield this power? They could unravel their own soul, or worse, become a new vessel for the very shadow they sought to defeat. The secret fire was not a simple tool, it was a covenant, and a broken covenant could doom the world. Yet, to lock this knowledge away entirely felt like a different kind of betrayal. Were they not, by their silence, ensuring that no one could ever again achieve what Anárion had? They were gatekeepers of a dangerous hope, forced to weigh the risk of a fall against the promise of a rise. This internal debate, this eternal question of how much truth the world can safely bear, would echo through every archive and council of the wise for all ages to come. It is the same dilemma faced by any guardian of a dangerous gift, from a parent shielding a child to a king protecting a realm. The resolution was a compromise etched in solemn vow and golden light. The most complete account, written on a single, luminous page of mithril-infused parchment, was not destroyed, nor was it placed on open display. It was sealed with spells of protection and hidden in the deepest archive of the greatest elven library, a place of silence and shadow. It was not meant for any random scholar. It was placed there to wait. The lore masters, in their foresight, understood that history moves in cycles, and that the world's greatest needs are often met by its most unexpected souls. They trusted that a time would come, in some distant, desperate age, when the simplified myths would no longer be enough, when the shadow grew so thick that only the original, unadulterated truth could provide a path forward. On that day, a destined hand, guided by need and purity of heart, would find its way to that silent chamber. The page would be waiting, not as a dusty relic, but as a slumbering spark, holding its breath for the moment it would be needed to rekindle the flame of hope for all. That new star was a permanent insult, burning in Melkor's eyes. Its unwavering light, a constant reminder of Anárion's defiance, fueled a rage that shook the very foundations of Angband. He could not snuff it from the sky, so he resolved to blacken the earth beneath it. The forges of his northern fortress roared day and night, their hellish glow a false dawn in the poisoned lands. But he was no longer content with corrupting spirits or building armies of orcs. His wrath demanded monsters. From the deepest fires, he bred the first of the winged dragons, creatures of scale and shadow, whose very breath could curdle stone. From the pits of ancient shadow, he summoned and amplified the Balrogs, beings of fire and whip, whose terror could break the mightiest armies. This was no longer a war of stealth and stolen lights. It was an escalation, an arms race of pure, apocalyptic power. The consequence of this monstrous industry was a wave of terror that swept across the land. The free peoples, the elves who had awakened under the stars, and the other nascent races, found themselves facing an existential threat. They were no longer merely hiding from scattered shadows, they were fighting for their very survival. Isolated communities were overrun. Ancient forests were set ablaze by dragon fire. The world plunged into a period of great turmoil and war, a desperate struggle where the only choices were to unite or to perish. This shared desperation forged the first great alliances, binding together clans and kindreds who had previously known only of each other through legend. They fought not for glory, but for the right to see the next sunrise, a cause born from the most primal need. High in the mansion of Manwë, the Valar watched this suffering unfold. The debate that had once been theoretical was now agonizingly real. How far should they intervene directly in the affairs of Middle-earth? To send their full might would be to risk breaking the world they sought to save, turning the continent into a scorched battlefield. But to stand aside was to condemn the free peoples to a slow, grinding extinction under the claws of Melkor's new horrors. This was the terrible weight of their power, the understanding that their help could be as destructive as the enemy's hate. The choice they made in this moment would irrevocably shape the fate of every age to come, setting a precedent for the relationship between the divine and the mortal. It raised the stakes of the conflict to a cosmic level, pushing the world inevitably toward a final, cataclysmic confrontation where there would be no neutral ground, only victory or utter ruin. The light of Anárion star fell on more than one brilliant mind in the Undying Lands. In the city of Tirion, an elf of unparalleled skill named Fëanor looked upon that distant beacon and felt not humble reverence, but a fierce, competitive fire. If a Maia could capture a fragment of the primordial flame, what could he, the greatest craftsman of the Eldar, achieve with the living light that illuminated his own world? The two trees of Valinor, Laurelin and Tulperion, cast their radiant gold and silver light upon the land, a glory so profound it seemed eternal. Fëanor set himself a task that would echo Anárion's, yet be twisted by a different spirit. He would not merely kindle a flame, he would imprison the very light of the trees themselves. He labored in secret, with a focus so intense it bordered on obsession, and from a crystalline substance of his own devising, he forged 3 jewels, the Silmarils. Into their unbreakable hearts, he bound the mingled light of gold and silver. They were the most beautiful and perfect things ever made by elf or man, living vessels of a divine radiance. But in that moment of supreme triumph, the ancient dilemma returned. The Valar, seeing this new, captured light, asked that the Silmarils be left unbound, their light shared freely to hallow the land, just as they had once counseled Anárion to share his knowledge. Fëanor faced the same choice, the conflict between a creator's possessive love and his duty to the wider world, and he made the opposite decision. He refused. He withheld his masterpieces, claiming they were rightfully his alone. His brilliant creation became an object of pride, a thing to be owned and defended, not a gift to be given. This single act of withholding replicated Anárion's initial conflict, but on a scale that would fracture an entire people. The light within the Silmarils was indeed a cousin to the secret fire, a shard of the same fundamental song of creation. But by binding it to his own unyielding will and pride, Fëanor had, in his quest for ultimate beauty, forged the very instruments of the world's greatest sorrow. The jewels were no longer just vessels of light, they were seeds of doom, proving that the power to create the sublime carries an equal power to unleash the tragic. That prideful refusal echoed like a crack in the foundation of the world. In the deep shadows, Melkor, whom the elves now called Morgoth, heard it. He saw in Fëanor's possessiveness the perfect lever to pry the Noldor from the protection of the Valar. With the aid of the monstrous spider, Ungoliant, he did the unthinkable. He poisoned the 2 trees of Valinor, plunging the Undying Lands into a darkness they had never known. In that profound gloom, he struck again, descending upon Fëanor's stronghold to steal the Silmarils. The very jewels forged from the stolen light of the trees were now stolen themselves, the ultimate perversion of Fëanor's craft. The world went dark, and the Noldor's hearts filled with a black, suffocating despair. In that moment of absolute loss, Fëanor's grief did not turn to wisdom, but to a white-hot, all-consuming rage. He stood before his 7 sons and a host of his people, and with a voice like cracking steel, he named Morgoth the enemy of all. Then, in his wrath, he committed an act that would damn his entire house. He swore the oath, calling upon the name of Eru, the One himself. Fëanor and his sons swore a terrible vow to pursue with vengeance and hatred to the ends of the world any being, Vala, elf, or man, or any other creature, who should hold a Silmaril from their possession. The very air grew heavy and still, as if the world itself recoiled from this binding of free will to an unbreakable curse. This was not a promise, it was a spiritual shackle, a force that would compel them to atrocities in its name. The first test of the oath came with horrifying speed. To reach Middle-earth and wage their war, the Noldor needed ships. They turned to their kin, the Teleri elves of Ulqualanda, masters of the swan ships. But the Teleri refused, bound by their own love for their vessels and foresight of the doom to come. The oath, however, permitted no refusal. What began as a plea turned to demands, then to violence. Fëanor and his followers drew swords against their own kin, staining the white shores of Valinor with elvish blood. This was the first kinslaying, a sin so profound it forever severed the Noldor from the grace of the Valar. In that terrible moment, every elf who followed Fëanor was forced into a choice that revealed the oath's corrosive nature. They had to choose between loyalty to their immediate family and king, and the greater morality of kinship and peace. For many, the compulsion of the oath and the heat of the moment overrode their conscience. They crossed a line from which there was no return, their hands stained, their spirits burdened with a guilt that would haunt their people for millennia. The Valar pronounced their doom, and the Noldor departed into a bitter exile, their eyes no longer shining with the light of the trees, but burning with the fatal light of their own pride and rage. They were banished, not just from a place, but from their own innocence, carrying with them a curse that would twist their heroism into tragedy and ensure that their war in Middle-earth would be as much a civil war among elves as a fight against the great enemy. The silence of watchful patience was finally broken by the din of marching legions. The Valar, their forbearance exhausted by the screams of the tortured earth and the suffering of the elves, unleashed their full might. This was the war for the sake of the elves, a cataclysm of righteous fury aimed at the heart of the shadow itself. The ground shook not with the subtle tremors of hidden forges, but with the world-shattering footsteps of the powers as they laid siege to the pits of Utumno. Mountains were thrown down as mere rubble to expose the deep delvings. Oceans boiled where they met the scorched shores of the enemy's land. The very face of Middle-earth was remade in the violence of its own deliverance, a brutal surgery to cut out a festering wound. Ancient fortresses were buried, and entire regions sank beneath the waves, becoming legends for later ages. The conflict was as devastating as it was necessary, a clear lesson that the price of removing such a deeply rooted evil is often paid by the very world one seeks to save. After an age of conflict that scarred the land forever, the Valar broke through. They laid chains upon Melkor himself, the source of the discord, and cast him out beyond the doors of night into the timeless void. His first dominion was ended, his physical form broken, and his power temporarily dispersed. A fragile, hard-won peace settled over the world, a silence that felt both blessed and unnerving after the constant roar of war. But in the chaos of the final collapse, as the great fortress crumbled and the Valar focused on their primary prize, a crucial detail was missed. Melkor's most cunning lieutenant, a Maia of immense craft and patience, named Sauron, did not stand and fight to the end. He saw the tide turning, the inevitability of his master's fall, and so he turned away, letting the darkness swallow him, slipping into the deep shadows of the world to wait. The greatest enemy was imprisoned, but his chief apprentice, schooled in all the arts of domination and deceit, was now loose in the world. The balance of power had been reset, but the stakes for the coming peace were now infinitely higher. The war was over, but the long game had just begun. That silence after the Great War was a dangerous comfort. With Melkor cast into the void, the peoples of Middle-earth breathed a collective sigh of relief, believing the age of darkness had truly ended. But the shadow had not been vanquished, only decentralized. Its most brilliant student, Sauron, had survived. He did not flee in panic, but with a cold, calculated purpose. He understood the blunt force of his master's approach had failed. Raw power had provoked a unified and overwhelming response. The new strategy would be one of subtlety, of working from within rather than crushing from without. He retreated into the deepest, most forgotten corners of the world, choosing not to confront the powers of light, but to conceal himself entirely from them. This was the beginning of a long, patient game, a campaign of deception that would define the entire Second Age. The consequence of his disappearance was a false peace, a golden age built on a foundation of sand. The great alliances forged in war slowly loosened. Kingdoms turned inward, focusing on their own glory and craft. The memory of the absolute, world-shattering threat began to fade, becoming a tale for elders, a legend that felt less real with each passing year. How do you guard against an enemy you cannot see, who offers gifts instead of armies? The wise, the few who kept the old scrolls and remembered the cost of the last war, faced an agonizing choice. Do they sound the alarm, risking panic and being labeled fear-mongers over a threat that has seemingly vanished? Or do they remain silent, watching and waiting, hoping to spot the first, almost invisible signs of the cancer's return? This burden of foresight became their lonely cross to bear, a quiet vigil in a world eager to forget. And in the dark, Sauron began to stir. He saw the pride of elves, the ambition of men, the deep-seated desires of dwarves. He saw that the love of creation could be twisted into a lust for possession, that the desire for order could be perverted into a hunger for control. He would not offer them terror, he would offer them power. He would not build a fortress, he would forge rings. The shadow was learning, adapting, and its next move would not be a roar, but a whisper, a seductive promise that would make its victims complicit in their own downfall. The fires of the elven forges in Eärendil burned with a light that rivaled the stars, descended from the great Fëanor himself. The Noldor smiths held within their blood the ancient drive to create, to shape the world with their hands and their song. Under the guidance of their lord, Celebrimbor, they turned their genius to a new art, the crafting of magical items. It began with simple things, cloaks that shimmered with the colors of twilight, or ropes that unknotted at a whispered command. Their intent was pure, to preserve the beauty of their realms against the slow decay of the world. But this flourishing of art and power created a new kind of music, a symphony of creation that carried far across the land, and it found a very interested listener. Sauron, the hidden enemy, heard this song of the forges. He understood that the old ways of brute force had failed his master, so he crafted a new weapon, a disguise of breathtaking perfection. He shed his terrible form and appeared as a being of immense wisdom and fair countenance, calling himself Anárion, the Lord of Gifts. He came not as a conqueror, but as a fellow craftsman, offering the knowledge the elves so desperately craved. He spoke of preserving the world, of halting time itself, of creating realms of everlasting beauty. His words were honeyed, and his logic was flawless, appealing directly to the deepest desires of the Noldor heart. He offered them the secrets to elevate their craft beyond anything they had ever dreamed. Celebrimbor stood at the center of this seduction, a lord torn between wonder and wariness. Here was a being who offered answers to all their artistic ambitions, a partner who seemed to understand their drive better than they understood it themselves. Yet a faint, discordant note echoed in his memory, the old tales of Melkor's deceptions and the pride that had felled his own grandfather, Fëanor. The choice before him was agonizing. Should he accept this freely given knowledge, this incredible gift that could unlock the full potential of his people, or should he turn away this stranger, potentially alienating his own smiths and foregoing a golden age of creation, all on the basis of a vague unease? It was a choice between progress and paranoia, between an open hand and a closed gate. He chose to trust. The gates of Eärendil, the chief city of a region, were thrown open to Anárion. The collaboration that followed was a time of unparalleled wonder. The forges sang day and night, their fires fueled by a shared vision. Under Sauron's tutelage, the elves learned to bind power to objects on a scale they had never imagined. They were not just preserving beauty and amour, they were weaving the very fabric of reality into their creations. But this great work carried a hidden flaw, a poison pill hidden within the sweetest fruit. For the techniques Anárion taught were subtly designed with a single, treacherous purpose: to create a master ring, a single key that could lock all others to its will. The very act of creation was building their own cage. The rings of power were forged in this union of elven skill and demonic guidance. 16 great rings were made, and then, in secret, Celebrimbor used his own pure understanding to craft 3 more, the mightiest of all, untouched by Sauron's hand. But the trap was already sprung. When Sauron, in his own dark land, forged the one ring in the fires of Eärendil, he spoke a binding verse that echoed across the world. Suddenly, the elves who wore the rings heard his voice in their minds, a terrible, commanding presence that sought to dominate their will. In that single, horrifying moment, Celebrimbor understood the full depth of his error. He had not been a partner in creation. He had been an apprentice to the architect of his own ruin. The beautiful objects they had forged were not just tools of preservation. They were leashes, and the shadow now held the other end. The pursuit of a perfect, unchanging world had delivered them into the hands of the very force that sought to control it completely. The war for Middle-earth was no longer a memory. It was a reality born from the ashes of their forges, a conflict where the greatest weapons had been forged by the hands of the intended victims. The One Ring glowed with a malevolent life in the fires of its birth, a perfect circle of gold that held nothing but absolute will. In that moment of its making, Sauron achieved what his master Melkor had only ever dreamed of: the domination of all life through a single, unbreakable point of control. His voice, a spiritual tremor that that shook the foundations of the world, echoed in the minds of every elf who wore one of the lesser rings. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky. His thought was not a whisper, but a command, a declaration of ownership that sought to seize their very souls. In the fair city of a region, Celebrimbor staggered as if struck. The beautiful rings on his fingers, creations he had believed were pure, suddenly felt like shackles. The betrayal was not just political, it was profoundly intimate. He had shared the deepest secrets of his craft, and in return, the fair-faced Anárion had used that trust to forge a key for their prison. There was no time for grief, only for a desperate, instinctual act of preservation. He tore the rings from his fingers, his heart screaming a warning to the other ring bearers. Across the lands, the elves followed his lead, removing their rings and breaking the connection before Sauron's will could fully take root. The 3, the greatest of the rings, crafted by Celebrimbor's hand alone and untouched by the Dark Lord, were hidden away, their power preserved but their use now fraught with peril, for to wield them was to risk revealing them to the ever-searching eye. The age of collaboration was over. The long, weary struggle against his dominion had begun. A terrible choice now lay before every free people. The dwarves, stubborn and rooted in their mountain halls, found their rings did not bend them to Sauron's will, but instead amplified their native lust for gold, creating dragon-like hordes that drew ruin upon them. They chose to hide, fortifying their kingdoms and turning inward, becoming insular and suspicious. Many men, offered power and longevity, found the temptation too great. They chose to submit, their rings twisting them into invisible, spectral servants, the Nazgûl, whose very existence was an extension of their master's malice. But others, elves and men and dwarves of pure heart, looked upon the growing shadow in the east and chose to resist. This was not a unified, glorious uprising, but a scattered, desperate defiance. Isolated kingdoms raised their banners, hidden rangers took to the wilds, and lore masters began the patient, secret work of preserving what knowledge they could against the coming darkness. The stakes were no longer about territory or treasure, but the survival of everything good, from the simple joy of a harvest festival to the complex beauty of an elven song. And as a symbol of this new age of fear, the dark tower of Barad-dûr began to rise in Mordor, its peak piercing the clouds, its shadow a tangible stain upon the land that could be seen for leagues. It was a constant, grim reminder that the war for the soul of Middle-earth was not a memory, but a present and terrible reality. The shadow of Barad-dûr grew long, a stain of fear spreading across the free lands of Middle-earth. In response to this open tyranny, a final, desperate coalition was forged. Gil-galad, the High King of the Elves, and Eärendil, the King of the Dunedain in exile, joined their forces into the last alliance. This was not the cosmic war of the Valar against Melkor, but a mortal struggle, a last stand for the world of sunlight, and song against the crushing silence of the Dark Lord's order. Their combined host, a sea of silver and steel, marched upon the very gates of Mordor, a flicker of defiant light against the impregnable blackness. The war that followed was one of the most brutal and costly in the long history of Middle-earth. The siege of the Dark Tower lasted for years, a grinding attrition of hope and life. The slopes of Eärendil were watered with the blood of elves and men, their sacrifices paving the way for a final, climactic confrontation on the fiery mountain itself. There, upon the slopes of doom, Eärendil and Gil-galad faced Sauron in single combat. It was a battle of titans, and though they managed to overthrow him, the price was everything. Both kings fell, broken and slain, their lives the final cost of victory. In that moment of chaos and triumph, the ring was cut from Sauron's hand, and his physical form was unmade. His power fled, his tower crumbled, and his armies scattered like dust. But the victory was hollow, a tragedy masked as a triumph. The elves, having spent so much of their innate light in the struggle, felt the pull of the undying lands grow stronger, their time in Middle-earth now truly beginning to wane. The Great Alliance was broken, its leaders gone, and a profound weariness settled over the survivors. And then came the choice that would echo for 3,000 years. Isildur, Elendil's son, stood amidst the ruin, the one ring lying before him. He had seen his father die, his people slaughtered. In his grief and his claim of justice, he declared the ring Wergild, a blood price for his father's death. He reached out and took it. It was a human decision, understandable in its raw emotion, yet catastrophic in its consequence. The ring had not been destroyed, only misplaced. Its temptation had proven too great, even for a noble heart, in a moment of profound loss. By claiming it as a prize, Isildur did not just spare a trinket, he preserved the very essence of the enemy. He escalated the stakes for every generation to come, turning a finished war into a suspended sentence. The ring, now a secret burden on the line of kings, soon slipped from Isildur's finger in a chance ambush, lost to the murky depths of the great river. It passed from history into a half-forgotten legend, a dormant threat sleeping in the dark, waiting for the shadow to gather once more and call it home. The ring's loss did not erase the deeper history. While kingdoms rose and fell, a secret lineage of memory endured, passed in whispers among the very wisest. Elrond in his quiet house at Imladris, and Galadriel in her golden wood, they were more than just rulers. They were living archives, keepers of the flame's true story. They understood that the tale of Anárion was not a finished myth, but a hidden wellspring of strength. In dark hours, when the shadow of Mordor stretched long, they would recall the Star Shaper's sacrifice, the pure light that had withstood the first and greatest darkness. This memory was a shield against despair, a quiet assurance that no shadow, however deep, was truly absolute. This guardianship was not a passive act of remembrance. It was an active, burdensome choice. To whom do you reveal such a dangerous truth? Share it too freely, and you risk it being twisted into just another tool for power, a target for the enemy's most cunning servants. Keep it too close, hoard it like a dragon's treasure, and you ensure its eventual death, leaving future generations without its crucial light when they need it most. Every decision to speak of the secret fire was weighed with immense care, a balance between offering hope and inviting peril. Do you tell a young, passionate king, hungry for victory, that his greatest weapon might be a spark of selfless creation? Or do you guard the secret, allowing him to learn a harder, more costly lesson through his own struggle? This secret tradition became the hidden backbone of resistance. When the Dunedain Rangers patrolled the wilds, their vigilance was more than a military duty. It was an echo of that first watchfulness declared by the Valar, when Gandalf wandered the lands, kindling courage in the hearts of the small and the forgotten. He was embodying the very principle Anárion died for, that true power lies in nurturing light, not dominating will. The wise did not command armies from the front. They guided, they counseled, they placed small, crucial stones in the river of history, trusting the current to carry them to where they were needed. Their long watch was a testament to a profound belief that the world's fate often hinges not on a single, glorious battle, but on the patient, unseen work of preserving a fragile truth against the relentless tide of forgetting. A fragile peace settled over Middle-earth, a long twilight that lasted for nearly 3,000 years. With Sauron's form broken and his ring lost, the free peoples turned to the slow work of rebuilding their kingdoms. Gondor and Arnor, the realms of men, flourished in this watchful age, their white cities gleaming under the sun, their fields abundant. Yet in the quiet halls of Rivendell and Lorien, a secret burden was carefully guarded. The wise, led by Elrond and Galadriel, made a fateful choice. They would not proclaim the truth of the ring's survival to the world. To do so would be to unleash a torrent of fear and a dangerous, greedy hope, inviting every power-hungry lord and dark sorcerer to hunt for the ultimate prize. This decision was a shield, protecting the world from itself, but it was also a gamble. It meant that when the shadow finally stirred again, most of Middle-earth would be unprepared, lulled by centuries of false security. The foundation of this new age was not stone, but a secret, and secrets have a way of festering in the dark. And deep in the misty mountains, beside the cold waters of a subterranean lake, a creature named Sméagol celebrated a birthday. His friend Déagol brought him a gift from the riverbed, a simple, golden ring. The moment Sméagol saw it, a possessive fire ignited in his heart. He demanded it, and when it was denied, a long-buried darkness surfaced. His hands, which had only known fishing and simple play, found a new purpose. He took the ring and his friend's life in a single, terrible act. Crawling into the mountains to hide his crime and his treasure, he began his long, wretched life as Gollum, a guardian of the very thing that had destroyed him. The ring had chosen a new keeper, one who would love it and hate it, and in his twisted devotion, keep it hidden from all eyes, waiting for the day its true master would call it home. The light of the phial was not merely a star in a glass vial, but a window into time itself. In the silent, timeless space of Galadriel's mirror, Aragorn saw it all. He was no longer a solitary ranger from the north, but a thread in a tapestry woven across millennia. He witnessed the first kindling of the secret fire in Anárion's hands, the terrible sacrifice in the spire of Utumno, and the long vigil of the star that now guided him. He saw the failures of Isildur, his own ancestor, not as a distant legend of weakness, but as a debt that had been passed down through the bloodline, a debt he was born to repay. This was not a history lesson, it was an inheritance. The weight of the past settled upon him not as a burden, but as a profound and humbling purpose. He was not just a man seeking a crown. He was the heir to a covenant, the latest guardian in an unbroken line, sworn to stand against the shadow. His quest to reclaim the throne of Gondor was suddenly dwarfed by a greater responsibility, to rekindle the hope of men and fulfill a promise made in fire and starlight ages before his birth. This understanding galvanized his spirit, burning away all traces of doubt. The path before him was no longer one of choice, but of necessity. He would embrace the legacy, no matter the cost. This resolve led him to the one choice that could turn the tide of the war, a path so perilous it was spoken of only in whispers and dread. He would walk the paths of the dead to summon the Oathbreakers from their ancient curse. It was a gamble that merged the sins of the past with the desperate needs of the present. To call upon a ghostly army bound by a broken vow was to stare into the absolute depths of despair and command it to serve hope. And when he emerged from the mountains, a king with the light of the faithful dead at his back, his course was set. The final act would be a gambit of pure, audacious will. He would not hide behind the walls of Minas Tirith. He would march to the very gates of Mordor, a small, defiant host, challenging the vast legions of darkness. With the star of Eärendil, the last fruit of Anárion's sacrifice, bound to his brow, he became a living beacon. His charge was not just a military maneuver, it was a spiritual declaration, a final, desperate act to draw the eye of Sauron away from the Ring-Bearer's secret quest. In that moment, the ancient struggle of the secret fire against the shadow reached its ultimate height. The fate of every age balanced on the edge of a sword in the hand of a king who finally understood his name. The mountain of fire roared its last, and the One Ring vanished into the seething heart of Eärendil. With a silence that was louder than any explosion, the power of Sauron was unmade forever. His dark tower crumbled into dust, his armies scattered like mist under a sudden sun, and the great eye that had watched the world for an age was closed, never to open again. The Third Age, an epoch defined by this long shadow, came to an end not with a whisper, but with the final, cleansing breath of a world released from a terrible burden. And from this ruin, a king arose. Aragorn, son of Arathorn, took the throne of Gondor, restoring the line of kings that stretched back to Eärendil and beyond. His coronation was more than a political event. It was the reaffirmation of an ancient alliance, a binding of elves and men in a fellowship that honored the very first pacts made under the starlight. In this renewed bond, the spirit of Anárion's original sacrifice was finally honored, not in a hall of fire, but in the unified heart of a free people. The world was saved not by a single, glorious act of destruction, but by the cumulative endurance of every light that had refused to be extinguished. The secret fire, whose origins were now a faded legend in the minds of most, had never truly gone out. It had flowed from the forges of the Valar into the star, held by Eärendil, a constant watchman in the night sky. It was captured again in the phial of Galadriel, a simple glass vessel that held the light of that same star, a gift that gave courage to the smallest and most fearful of heroes in the darkest of places. And ultimately, it found its most potent vessel, not in jewels or magic, but in the resilient courage of humble hearts, in the loyalty of friends who would not abandon one another, and in the compassion that chose to spare a life when taking it would have been easier. The ring was destroyed not by power, but by pity, a final, beautiful echo of the flame's original, creative purpose. The Fourth Age dawns, an age of men, and the world is irrevocably changed. The elves depart for the undying lands, their song growing faint upon the shores of Middle-earth. The memory of the primal flame, of Anárion and his long vigil, fades into myth and then into forgotten legend. Yet some truths do not need to be remembered to be felt. They are woven into the fabric of the world itself. The hope that kindles in the darkest hour, the act of creation that defies the urge to destroy, the small, stubborn light that refuses to surrender to the vast and waiting dark. These are the quiet, enduring legacies of the secret fire. It is a whisper on the wind, a glimmer in the new starlight, a promise that even when the story is forgotten, the light it carried continues to shine.
you.